I have two items to be taken as one together. Left to be dealt with items EX 8.20, additional funding to support Toronto Police Services response to gun violence, and EX 8.26, which was an added item that I put on this morning. And so, just looking at the deputations, because we'll deal with that first, we have two deputations on item EX 8.20. Miguel Avila Velarde first.
Thank you. The answer to gun violence is very simple: no guns. I don't understand why our politicians don't have the courage to say no more arms, no firearms allowed in the city of Toronto. We should suspend the sales of guns in the city. So it will take some kind of political willingness to change our law so that we don't have to invest in over-policing of our communities, which doesn't resolve the problem. It does only provide them with extra overtime calls, more expenditure on of vehicles, gas, etc. It's a whole mess that it doesn't address the whole matter. Because the root of the problem, as you are aware, Mr. John Tory, that we had to invest in our communities. Why it's important to invest in our communities? Because they're the ones who are expecting us to invest in good jobs. I'm part of a region park revitalization, and we are working to ensure that phases 4 and 5, we have a community benefits agreement in place so that we can secure good jobs for region park residents. So what happened last year is we hired 300 more police officers to patrol our streets in the city budget of 2019. I'm being graphical so people who watch the YouTube video can understand. So $300, that's an increase in the police budget, and that is the reflection that taxpayers had to carry the burden. You see the breakdown on this document from the CBC News? I came this month, and I spoke with members of the Budget Committee and explained to them, why don't we defer some of the money that goes into the police budget, for instance, to address the issue of the absence of the cut of the child benefits, transition for refugees and immigrants that the government of Doug Ford is cutting. So you said something very true, Mr. Mayor, today. We are the dumb hole of all the decision-making done by the province and the federal government. On August the 21st, there was an incident in which a young man, a 14-year-old man, was brutalized by 4 police officers. They kick him, they treat him, they have left with trauma, and the problem is that we taxpayers, we had to pay for the legal cover of lawyers for those police officers that committed this crime in North York. I don't know if in this room we have counselors that are live in that ward where the incident happened. Mr. Mayor, I never hear you saying one word about this matter. It was a black boy that was senseless, brutalized by Toronto police officers. If you care about it so much and you sit at the board of the Toronto Police Services, you could have said at least something about it to condemn the violence by the Toronto police on a 14-year-old. I saw you a picture of me and my son. Imagine that they do that to my son, you know, it will be unforgiven. So here we go again. Invest in the communities. That's the message today. No cops, no prison, fund schools. And last but not least, I want to tell you tomorrow at the Toronto Police Services Board, I will be speaking on behalf of Chris Langenfeld. He is not able to attend the board meeting because of his opposition to the search and back process that the board is reintegrating in the lobby at Toronto Police Headquarters. So I understand Chairman Pringle has denied us the right to speak for Chris. So I want to let you know that we are going to speak for Chris because he really brings a lot of good information to the board. But to silence his voice is wrong. So if you have any inconvenience, let me know today. If you have a problem to allowing me or Jarek or Brenda to speak on behalf of Chris. Let us know, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions of the deputant? Okay. The next deputation is from Derek Moran. You have up to 5 minutes, as you know, Mr. Moran and Derek, and you may have some questions.
I just want to say by me speaking at this meeting, this shall not be deemed to be in any way my consent expressed or implied in doing so as for God bless Her Majesty the Queen and long live Her Majesty the Queen. And let the record show I do not consent to the unconstitutional searches violating Section 8 of the Constitution Act 1982 that are currently taking place here at Toronto City Hall, as the province has never given the City of Toronto express statutory authority to do this. So in this report it says, City Council requests the City Manager to report back during the 2020 budget process on opportunities for partnerships with existing agencies to fund programs and services that address the root causes of violence and poverty reduction. So seeing this, I thought the City Manager, Chris Murray here, would be interested in knowing how the royal family solved poverty for themselves. And anyone can go read this for themselves. It's on a website called monarchist.org.uk/royal-finances, information about the royal finances. In 1760, King George III reached an agreement with the government over the Crown estate. The Crown lands would be managed on behalf of the government, and the surplus revenue would go to the Treasury. In return, the King would receive a fixed annual payment, which we today call the civil list. Since the 1760s, the Crown has surrendered the receipts from its estates. While the Crown estate has often generated £210.7 million in surplus income, all of its revenues have to date been paid to the Treasury as directed by a deal reached in 1760 by King George III in Parliament. Simply stated, Her Majesty is limited on cash spending for personal needs. So in order to have cash to spend on their personal needs, that's what they had to do. So if you go on the Government of Canada's website, there's a page called Charities and Giving Glossary, and they have a definition for annuities, and they actually explain how to do this for everyone. Charitable gift annuity is an arrangement under which a donor transfers capital, think of the security of the person we all have the right to in Section 7 of the Constitution, to a charitable organization in exchange for immediate guaranteed payments for life at a specified rate depending on life expectancy or for a fixed term. Now, Mayor Tory, you know, being a member of the police board, you take a real oath that at the very end of it, the last sentence says, "So help me God." So you're literally telling God to help you. What I just read sounds a lot like from Malachi 3:10. Bring ye all the tithes into the storehouse, that there may be meat in mine house, and prove me now herewith, saith the Lord of hosts, if I will not open you the windows of heaven and pour you out a blessing, that there shall not be room enough to receive it. And in 1 Corinthians 16:14, it simply says, let all your things be done with charity. You know, I actually sent a letter by registered mail. It was actually a full disclosure notice to the MP for my area, Marco Mendocino. I wrote to him, "Hi, Marco, and how are you about this? I require full disclosure on how do I go about transferring the capital of the security of the person I have back to the Crown in exchange for immediate guaranteed payments for life as King George III did in 1760, as mentioned on the Government of Canada's website and the graphic on the royal family's finances below." And his response was, well, actually, I'm still waiting. He hasn't gotten back to me on that. So let the record show, though, the same as King George III, that I wish to gift the security of the person gifted to me initially by Her Majesty in exchange for the immediate guaranteed annuity payments for life at a specified rate depending on life expectancy or for a fixed term, as mentioned on the Government of Canada's Charities and Giving glossary page. I just want to slip in here. I want to thank Councillor Ainsley for his kind words at the end of a presentation I made recently at General Government. I think it was the one where I explained sections 440 and 457 of the Bank Act say that a bank shall not charge service fees. And I hope Councillor Ainsley helps spread the word as a small effort to help reduce poverty, that banks are just stealing money from us and calling it a monthly service charge. So this is a case, Keewatin versus Minister of Natural Resources, 2011, Superior Court of Justice, where it mentioned that the Crown asked First Nations to share their lands with settlers, and First Nations did so on the condition that they would retain adequate land and resources to ensure the well-being of their nations. Compensation, again, the security of the person in Section 7 of the Constitution, was offered in exchange for the agreement of First Nations to share. First Nations were promised compensation in the form of annual payments or annuities, as I just explained what was going on earlier, social and economic benefits, and the continued use of their lands and resources. And I just want to mention that at the first TTC board meeting of the year, that a distinguished former Toronto Police Services Board member, Councillor Shelley Carroll, actually nodded her head in acknowledgement when I mentioned that security of the person is not safety, it's financial in nature. So, love you, Councillor Carroll.
Thank you very much for those comments. Are there any questions of the deputant? Okay. Then we would move on to questions of staff on these two items taken together. We have no deputations on the newer item, which is number 26, I think it is, 26, 8.26. So we would move to questions of staff, and we can do the questions on both items taken together. Councillor Carroll.
I actually would like, or Toronto Police, yes, Toronto Police are still here. I'd love to ask one question of them so that we can flesh out something that we asked at budget. It sort of partly stems from the Premier's focus at the announcement of these funds and the media sort of picking up on it. But there's a misconception in the community that we're about to spend $6.5 million on cameras and cameras alone. That's not really where these funds will end up, is it?
Correct. The cameras were another announcement of $3 million for additional for the expansion of our CCTV program, public space.
Right, but but there's a federal contribution, a provincial contribution, and we're asked to give our share. Some of it will be able to be strategically placed in terms of policing, callbacks, et cetera. Yeah.
It will be we'll be having additional resources for deploying high visibility patrols, as well as enhancing our bail compliance checks, as well as more specialized investigations to deal with the gun violence.
Right, okay. Thank you very much. That's my question of the police service. Are we asking questions of both items at the same time? Yep. The other question was, which I think will clear up confusion that might otherwise emerge at council, because I have already served the motion that Speaker Nunziata and I discussed at Budget Committee. In endorsing Mayor Tory's item today, when staff report back on this, they'll report back to council the same time as the motion coming to council that Speaker Nunziata and I have signed. Would the review and the advice really be pretty much the same thing that led to that motion being moved about towards peace? You'll simply outline the review that led to that recommendation?
Through the chair, yes, Councillor.
Okay, and at that time, you'll be able to describe how that program actually coordinates some of the things that might be generated by the police service and SDF&A and parks. All of those programs come together if we do that one.
Yes, we will be able to see how those knit together. Our focus will be more on the community side and city side than the police side.
Right, okay, thank you. Those are my questions. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
And that was the intent of the idea, was to get that information in front of all councillors, because it was previously in front of the Budget Committee only. Okay, so other questions of staff? Councillor Pasternak.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Police Services. Who funds witness protection programs? Is that provincial, or do we fund it at the local level? Province. Is it effective? Does it work? Do you find it's effective? Does it work?
Well, that's a long answer, Councillor. It's there's definitely some issues with the provincial program. You know, I think the chiefs often talked about the platinum and gold-plated program. That's generally the way the province works. It's very, very difficult for a lot of people to enter into that program.
Community resource officers, is that program still active in the schools?
Not on a full-time basis.
How many officers are in the schools?
Yeah, I don't know that number, I'm sorry.
That's a pretty important number. Would you describe the program as successful or just winding down? And
Well, it's really all becoming part of our new neighborhood officer program. We're getting officers into the community. Unfortunately, we don't have the number that we would like currently to devote to that program. But part of that neighborhood officer program will be into their communities, into the schools, talking to people, establishing relationships. It's all part of our new neighborhood officer program.
do you find there's a role for school boards to play? That in fact, it's an early childhood issue, and that when we approach it as someone who's already running around with a weapon, that it's very hard to put the toothpaste back into the tube?
Well, there's definitely strategies that have to be longer term and ones that are more immediate. And for example, Project Community Space is a plan to address the immediate issue. I think all our different partners, whether it's school boards, social agencies, need to be involved in the longer term plan to keep people out of this gang way of life.
How many people do we actually turn around, or that's hard to quantify, but is there a model for turning youth around who are carrying weapons or committing gun crimes? How often can we turn them around and have them as contributing members of society?
Actually, I think we've had great success with that. And for example, I would use the Pro Action program that has police officers working with kids in different communities, whether it's in reading programs, athletic programs. We find that we have great success with those youth. And in fact, we've had officers, I just heard one talking about it the other day, where there was a shooting and they're calling him up on his phone and giving him the information about what had happened. And that's because of the relationships that are created with the officers.
Okay, thank you.
Questions of staff? Councillor Perks, I saw you there, and I moved very quickly to members of the committee, but... oh, well, okay then. No comment. No comment. And Councillor Cole, same thing. Before I moved off the visiting members, did you have any questions of the staff, meaning police, or no? Okay. Then we would move to Deputy Mayor Thompson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Through you to the police. How will the funds be utilized?
It's going to be for increased officer visibility and working in the neighborhoods and increased community engagement, intelligence collecting. We'll be enhancing our bail compliance checks for those individuals that are involved in gun crime. More specialized investigations. So we're getting the right people focusing on the investigations, and we're seeing some good success that way in terms of solving the shooting since we put that in place.
Right.
Project Community Space.
So this additional funding will help you to do those things that you just mentioned.
That's correct.
What were you doing before?
Well, we didn't have, a lot of the additional work is being done by callback. Because
it's overtime?
That's correct. Because we didn't have the availability of officers to, particularly the increased visibility.
So you had the availability, you just didn't have the funding to bring them through overtime because you're not actually getting new officers as part of this funding. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So it's the funding that was the issue that is going to help to address this issue?
That's correct.
Right. And so then, with respect to the future, how will the city and I guess us as politicians basically measure the success? Will we see a reduction in gun activity? Will we see an increase in information that you have to help you to, I guess, create an intervention into the midst of some of the gang activities and or the users of gun? Will that be part of the measurement that we'll see in terms of success?
Yes, exactly. We'll be looking at the number of arrests, the number of community engagements, any reduction in shootings. That we'll be trying to quantify whatever we can in terms of seeing a reduction in the amount of violence.
New York City has police officers stationed here in Toronto, is that correct?
There is one officer.
There's one officer, right. And what's the working relationship with respect to that one officer and, of course, the New York City Police Department in that I think it's our view that a lot of the guns that are coming in comes from the U.S., comes through our border. Are there sort of intelligent component part that you're working with the U.S. police, not just New York City, but by extension Detroit and other border policing agencies and so on? What's the relationship with those particular agencies?
Actually, the relationship is very, very good. I mean, we have a provincial firearms enforcement partnership, and we work with Canada Border Services as well as the RCMP and the OPP and the U.S. firearms unit, and so we have a very good relationship with them. And not just New York City, with
right.
one officer involved, but all the various agencies, the FBI,
Yeah.
and the
So
ATF.
if there was one area of our borders, for example, that would be considered an area where it's of great concern, where would that area be? In terms of guns coming through and so on, perhaps maybe bypassing the normal custom agencies and so on.
Well, we're seeing it really across the province at the different border points. So whether it's Kingston, Detroit,
Right.
Buffalo, it's across the province.
But that could be Vancouver as well and coming through in other areas, coming right across the country.
That would be occurring as well, yes.
Right. And then I guess my final question, realizing that a lot of the young persons who are using the guns don't seem to have the means to cross the border to get the guns, who would be perhaps an entity and an organization that do you think is allowing or bringing most of those weapons into the country? Because it's really about a business.
But there's a lot of people that are involved in it. And there are a number of members that, gang members that have a fairly affluent lifestyle. And we see them traveling abroad quite a bit. So they can be involved, they are in fact involved in the gun trade as well.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor Thompson. Any other questions? I have a few, but I just want to make sure everybody else had their chance. Okay, well, Deputy, and thank you very much again for being here. Could I just go through the three areas that you mentioned in response to a couple of the questions today and just confirm that, because you used the word will, and of course my understanding is this exercise started a couple of weeks ago and will run for a few weeks yet. So can you confirm that there have been increased numbers of higher visibility patrols in selected neighborhoods? And I realize you may not be able to say how many neighborhoods, but I'm trying to encourage you to be as forthcoming with information as you can be without, giving information that's going to benefit the bad guys. But have there been high visibility patrols? And if so, can you confirm in how many neighborhoods that's been the case as a result of this funding, plus the funding coming from the other governments?
I can't give you the number, Mr. Mayor. I can tell you there has been increased patrols, not to the extent that we would like, because we just haven't had the staff to, even on the callback basis, to do. We're not using the funding on the uniform side to the extent that we've been allotted. Certainly on the investigative side, we are. But there has been considerable increased uniform patrols.
Okay, and then on the second one, which is more, I'll call it more rigorous bail compliance inspections, the chief explained to me a little bit about how that was going to work when I asked him for a plan to try and help with the situation we had in August in particular, and it continues to some extent today. Have you been able to carry out, have there been increased numbers and more rigorous bail inspections, bail compliance
Yes, there has, and in fact, my new numbers were just being collated today. I don't know what that number is, but they are substantially greater than we were doing in the past.
And just since you made allusion to that, one of the things that was complained about from the media to me this morning was that there hadn't yet been a sort of public accounting. And I made the point that you have to pick your time when you sort of are going to report on how these things have gone. But is it the case that at some point you might be able to sort of say, well, we carried out this many more bail compliance inspections, for example, because we had this money, and that I think most people accept would help to enhance public safety. Are you going to be able to report on those numbers at any stage publicly?
Yes, we will.
Okay. And then the third, I realize this is probably the one about which you'll be able to say the least, but have there been commenced and carried out, and are there being carried on now, specialized investigations, more rigorous specialized investigations into the guns and gangs area that related to the violence that we've been seeing in the city? Has that been made possible by this money?
Yes, it has. Yes, it has. And in fact, our solving rate has gone up considerably as well.
Okay, and in that regard, I've seen some of the information publicly about arrests that have been made and firearms that have been seized. And I think I'm correct in saying that during this period of time with some of these enhanced resources, we have been seeing increased numbers of firearms that have been seized, and that I assume could be reported on at some stage not too long from now to account to the public?
Yes, we will, sir. We'll be in great detail. We'll be putting out those numbers.
Okay, and then the only last thing I wanted to ask about was regional cooperation. This sort of came up a little bit indirectly yesterday, and can you tell us, what your assessment is of the degree of regional cooperation? By that I mean cooperation with Peel, York, OPP, RCMP, facilitated or not by this money, but how would you rank the level of cooperation and information sharing so that we can together take on this problem that we have?
That liaison and cooperation occurs on a daily basis among the operational officers, and I can also tell you that at my level, I am meeting bi-weekly with some of my partners to see how we can further that relationship.
And
in the interest of combating the gun violence.
Do you end up sharing a lot of information with them about things that we're confronting in the City of Toronto so that they can learn from that, benefit from that, gain intelligence from that?
Yes, and we have a lot of joint operation projects, so that we do work together that way.
And does the information come back the other way in terms of things they're experiencing, people they know about that may find their way onto your list of people you want to keep an eye on, this kind of thing?
Yes, it does, Mr. Mayor. I can assure you there's great cooperation, particularly in the GTA.
Okay, those are my questions. Thank you. So, anybody else with any questions of the staff? Okay, well, we'll thank you very much for being here and answering those questions, and then we would move to speeches. And so, Councillor Shelley Carroll first.
Thank you. So the item that's before you went through budget, and then we're considering it together with Mayor Tory's report. I just wanted to clarify, while staff are asked to report at City Council, there will be a motion. It will seem improbable, but there will already be a written notice of motion before you, moved by myself and Speaker Nunziata, that recommends the program that they will likely recommend in the report asked for here, so we can support both. That's really an accident of timing, is what it is. It would otherwise, this would have probably happened all at budget, but the mayor was sort of still in scooter mode and in recovery, so that may be a big part of it. An in-year budget ad is extraordinary. We know that. But we had an extraordinary year. No one has to tell me that adding funds in year is a big deal. I was budget chief when Lehman Brothers collapsed, and there was a take a number line at my door from every councillor saying, oh, the money's going to disappear, I need some now, in October. And that is not the time to start throwing the money around. But what's happening before us now, what's before you in this committee really is well thought out, including the recommendation that will result from Mayor Tory's motion. The deputants, despite their speeches, they know that I place a critical eye on police service at all times. They know that. But I actually need the police actions that will be funded by this item. That's why you see Speaker Nunziata and I doing this. We need neighborhood officers right now. I have a complex that's had 4 major incidents of gunfire in less than 12 months. And it's, I believe, no coincidence that 18 months ago, their neighborhood officer retired and has been gapped ever since. It's sad that it happened at that time, but I have a terrified community. And it's not the only one. Many of us do in this room. And so we do have to act, and we have to do both things. And so I do support the police ad. I need it this time. And I ask the questions of budget to make sure that it is strategic. It is far more in depth in the way it's going to be applied than the Premier led on in his announcement of his funds. That being said, I'm also moving the motion because I strongly believe, and I know many councillors do, that policing alone won't do it. We have to have a short-term strategy, and we have to play the long game. And so the work was done with staff to understand, out of all those things we asked for, back in 2018, the first time the federal government asked us, what other than policing should you be doing? SDF&A did yeoman's work to figure out the best possible programming, the best bang for the buck, to do the types of things that Councillor Pasternak was asking about, things beyond policing. And so we worked with them. And so rather than move a willy-nilly motion, what I moved is a motion for a program that is really quite brilliant. What staff developed in Towards Peace is a way of taking the crazy quilt of youth types of services and programs that each emergency violence gift, I call them. We had a violent summer, so here's some one-time money from another order of government. We've seeded many programs, but they're not integrated. And Towards Peace is about taking a small unit of staff to integrate them, to make sure that youth leaving a diversion program is ending up where he should go next, and that the people in the community know that's going to happen. Those are the types of things that come out of the recommendations that staff make because they are the experts. They're on the ground even more than we are. We're there to hear about the upset when an incident has happened. They really are trying to prevent them from happening in the first place with their programming. And so as we add policing, we do have to look at programming. That's why Mayor Tory is asking for it. That's why Budget Committee did the work of considering that before we brought recommendations to you. And so when we meet as a whole council, there will be the report from staff, but there will also be the immediate recommendation so that in this extraordinary time, we can make an extraordinary in-year budget ad that will immediately start to address the problems that Councillor Nunziata wants to address with her children and youth, that I want to address with mine, and all the rest of you want to address with children and youth who are at risk right this very minute of being recruited into gangs and gun violence. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Carroll. Others wishing to speak? Councillor Cole, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity. Yes, I certainly support the in-year increase in funding and the way it's going to be allocated, and the fact it's looking at the obvious core causes of our violence and also the immediate policing needs. So I think it's a very smart way to approach it. I just want to just put a few things on the record. I just think that since March of this year, I've been working with the Police of 13 Division very closely. We got word in March that there was going to be heavy-duty activity coming on board, and since March, they've deployed extra policing on the ground in my ward, and also the police officers of the 32 Division did the same thing. And they are really experienced, smart people, and So they've been on the ground since March. Despite being on the ground at unprecedented numbers, we've never had so much violence and gun activity in all my years. I've never seen it this bad. It's really unprecedented. And that's what frustrates my local police and also frustrates me in the community, is that despite all this extra police presence we've already had, the shooting continues. You know, we just had another one the other night. And it's not just in one neighborhood. It's happening about 4 or 5 neighborhoods in my riding, in my ward. I've never had it that bad. And you know what's really annoying is when I hear people, you know, we're all to blame for this, they tend to categorize the shootings to make themselves comfortable. So you hear them say, oh, it's gang violence. Don't worry about it, it's just the gang guys shooting each other. Oh, it's mob violence. They're killing each other. Don't worry about it.
Don't forget the Jamaicans.
It's targeted. It's the mob. It's the Jamaicans. It's the Vietnamese. So they said, don't worry about it. It's just them shooting each other. And that is really one of the core issues we've got to address. This is not about any one group or one area. Or then when I heard that idiotic comment last night from the mayor of Brampton talking about, you know, the 416 gangs coming up to Brampton, that's the kind of mentality that is really, as you said, Mr. Mayor, counterproductive. This is not isolated to one community, one neighborhood, one part of Toronto. This is Toronto's problem, and that's the only way we could approach it. And for us to try and feel comfortable because they say, well, it's the gangs that are doing it, I think that is really not productive to try and say, no, you don't have to worry. It just happened in that area, gang members. And we got to do something about gangs. Yes, there are gangs, obviously, but a lot of the activity, I think, is just random craziness because people diss each other on the internet, and they go out and shoot each other that same night. It's not even, you know, to call it gang violence sometimes is giving them too much credit. So it's very random in many cases. And the one thing that police tell me is there are more guns available than we ever seen before. That's for sure. I just want to say that since March, we also did, you know, the broken window theory. I've been doing that on the ground since March, and I've got great cooperation from Frances Nunziata. She knows that full well. Did that in New York. MLS has been great. They've been out there. We've had maybe 50 graffiti things wiped out. We've had everything from weeds, property that's falling apart. They've been out there just cleaning the whole community up, you know, since March, nonstop. I can give you the list of all the activity undertaken by our city staff, you know, seeing that, you know, we've got to basically clean neighborhoods up, and it helps avoid, you know, the tagging by the gangs and places where people loiter. So that's been ongoing since March, and yet this continues. I just also want to say that, you know, I've been through this. You know, I remember one time we had all this money thrown at the religious institutions, the pinball solution. They said, you know, we'll get in there and we'll give them all this money and the churches will solve all the problems. Well, we went through that. You know, how successful that was, I really don't know, but it was an effort. We've had Tavis. I remember, yeah, Tavis, send in the troops, and Tavis is going to solve the problem, and we did that.
I'll have to ask you to conclude.
Yeah, and then the last thing, we did the carding. Well, they said now people are telling me, oh, do the carding, bring it back, you'll solve all the problems. Folks, as you know, all of you, a lot of you have been through this, there's no magic solution. It's hard work, cooperative work, non-stop, day-to-day grind by our city staff, provincial officials, federal officials. It's just hard work. It's not going to be solved by one act or one simple blaming. We've got to keep grinding at this, as this, I think this has that approach in it in this, and that's why I support it.
Thank you, Councillor Cole. I think, Councillor Layton, please.
Yes, thank you very much, and I'll try to make this brief. There is a tendency when we hear the news on television, when we read about it, when we pick up Twitter and see that there's been another shooting, there's a knee-jerk reaction that I think we all feel. We all say, if only we had more police at that corner to enforce the law and to take the gun away. I think that for years we've tended to follow that cycle when these spikes in violent crime have come up, that we engage when we see people killing each other. When an investment in police, and in particular the investments that are proposed here, will help catch the criminals, they might not get to the root of the violence. Not when we see people killing each other, but when we see that child take that first step towards a life of crime, of feeling like they have no other options, of not having the role models and system in place around them, the institutions that give those young people support so that they choose a different path. And I think that if the intent of the original motion was to ultimately reduce violent crime in the city, there needs to be a commitment to greater investment in engaging our youth and in fighting poverty. We know those to be the roots of the violence in our city. There is certainly an enforcement side to all of this, like there is to road safety, which is also, I know, a big issue here. There's an enforcement side and there's a preventative side. And there are two sides to this coin, which is why I put forward a motion at Budget Committee that I was pleased and also very surprised that it had passed, that it passed Budget Committee and is in front of you today. And that's to start thinking about a different course, to start thinking, if we're going to make the investment in police enforcement, let's make twice the investment in prevention. And twice was very, it was very objective. It wasn't a subjective number. I just thought that the city should make the statement that we care we care equally, if not more so, about prevention and helping eliminate violence that way than we do about the end of pipe. Now, I've since had conversations with staff, and this isn't trying to accuse anyone on executive, the mayor, anyone of saying that there hasn't been greater investment in poverty reduction under our current, the previous term of council and this one. We have. We have increased the amount of investment in poverty reduction. We've also increased the amount of money we've spent on police. And to be fair, they're actually comparable in the range of increase. Dare I say there's actually been a greater increase in poverty reduction. I was very pleased and in fact, a little bit proud to say that was the case. Under the leadership of Pam McConnell, our mayor, and others on this executive. But I think we should start reinforcing it, not only when we see these spikes in violence, but within our budget process, that as we go down this path, if we really want to work towards the heart and roots of violent crime, that we have to, anytime we're talking about spending money on police, talk about spending twice as much on the preventative side. And I was very pleased to see that motion, again, quite surprised, but maybe I shouldn't have been, because we have been slowly going on this path. I think we could just formalize it a little bit. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Councillor Layton. What I'm going to do, because we've heard now, I think, from all the members of, Councillor Perks, you haven't Are you want, not, you're just here to learn, listen and learn? Okay. I will just, if I may, speak first on this, and then we'll see what other members of the committee want to chime in. I just want to say, it might surprise him as much as he was surprised to see that motion pass, that I agree with everything that Councillor Layton just said, and I think most of us do, and I'm not going to buy in necessarily at this point in time, because that's why we sent it off to the Budget Committee to look at whether twice, but you know, the bottom line is what I think you were really saying is we need to invest more in the root causes and in things that, like poverty and so forth, and I entirely agree with that. And you have not heard me in the course of having to deal with this, because I have, and I'm not complaining about this, it's a reality of my job. I have to answer for this. When there are shootings and killings that take place in the city, I end up answering. For right or for wrong, they come to me. And I've always given the same answer, which is there are three aspects to this, and it may be trying to oversimplify it, but I don't think so. One, making sure we have given adequate support to the police. Two, making sure that we either reform or better enforce or implement the laws that exist. And three, that we invest in what I call kids and families and neighborhoods. And so in the case of the motion before us, there are two, one to get some further information, but the first one, which has to do with authorizing this amount of money that has been allocated to the purposes that Deputy Raymer indicated, I was confronted in August by a spate of violence that was happening that was clearly unacceptable, as always the case. I asked the police chief, did he have everything that he needed in his view to be able to confront this and deal with this? And I think that's the logical question the mayor or any member of city council would ask the police chief. I said if there was more needed, I wanted a plan so that I could advocate to the other governments with that plan to get them to share in it, because I felt it was entirely appropriate in all of those three areas. Support for the police, the law, and investment in kids and families, that all the governments, not just the property taxpayers, especially on social programs, not just the property taxpayers, had to pay. I was also conscious of the fact that the police variance report up until the end of June had shown a very narrow room for maneuver. The city in its numbers had a little bit more maneuverability, so I was anxious not to have him not do something because they didn't have the budgetary room to do so. Because there's been comments made to the effect that I was trying to dictate what went on. It was always very clear that this had to be approved, as anybody knows, under our system by the council. But I also wasn't going to, in a period of peak anxiety on the part of our citizens, apparently peak activity on the part of the criminals, I wasn't going to say, well, gee, let's wait until the council meeting on October the 2nd, and then maybe we'll be able to find the resources to do something about that. And so the good news here is that while I made a commitment that I knew that I had to follow up by getting 14 votes at the City Council that would approve it, and that's what we're here in part beginning to do today, I also knew that it gave me the opportunity, by making a commitment that we would get passed, that I could get the other governments to contribute to this as well. I will say, in fairness, the federal government's money was new, in the sense that it wasn't part of some previous commitment they'd made. The province's money, it's less clear. It seems it may be part of the commitment they made of 25 million, but the bottom line is we had the resources, and I made it clear to the police chief, as you would expect, that I wouldn't expect they would spend any money they didn't have to spend, but that if they thought it was going to be helpful in the context of higher visibility patrols in neighborhoods where it would do some good, rigorous bail inspections, given the problem they've indicated over and over again is a big problem for them, which is people getting out on bail who are arrested on firearms charges and other things like that, and specialized investigations, in other words, intelligence gathering on the guns and the gangs, that I was very happy that they should do this work and that I would get the support needed here in order to make that happen. And so I will just say that, but I've always, and then I should tell you that I then spent my time after that, which was really just in the last 2 or 3 weeks, strongly advocating to the federal government for them to come forward with more money through a government announcement of increased support for some of the money that we applied for. And quite frankly, I was given assurances that we would receive by the federal government to help with crime prevention. And the clock ran out in terms of the election being called, and that money being made available to us by way of what I'll call a government announcement, so that we could begin to invest that money now, knowing that that's a different kind of investment and that it pays dividends for sure. We know the biggest ones, but it pays them down the road as opposed to the immediacy of what we needed to do to support the police. And so I will just say, in the cause of making sure that we tried to diminish that anxiety that people felt, try to diminish that level of criminal activity, and you heard the deputy chief here say that they will report in due course on what they believe the effects were of that investment that has been made and that will be approved, I hope, here and at council. that I felt that that action had to be undertaken to make sure the police had what the chief told me they needed, and that didn't take away from my advocacy with respect to bail. And I saw Councillor Cole the other day talking on television about the same things, taking firearms charges seriously, reforming the bail laws, and dealing with things like that that do not rest, frankly, at our doorstep. And then finally, the investment in kids and families, which I believe we have to take more seriously along the lines of what Councillor Layton said, as we've been doing, and he acknowledged that too since I became the mayor, for sure. But we have to do more, but recognizing that we cannot do this alone, nor should we on property tax dollars. No matter what level of taxation we have, property taxes are not meant to fund social programs, at least not in whole, that's for sure. And so I will continue to advocate to the other governments for that, because the three parts of this are equally important. In fact, the latter one is the best long-term investment we can make in quelling this unacceptable level of criminal activity going forward. So that sort of explains why we're here, and the motion or the letter that I'm sending forward to get the assessment is only so that the council as a whole can have all the information the Budget Committee had the other day. Who else would like to speak? We have Councillor Deputy Mayor Thompson, and we have Councillor Nunziata, and Councillor Pasternak. Did I see your hand as well? No. So we have those two for starters. Go ahead, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. This is a subject matter that goes on and on and on. It's an interesting situation where, in many cases, in this city, you have a greater chance of getting away with murder than actually getting a job. And that's a real statement that we need to be aware of. And I know that many have talked about the preventative programs and what we have to do in investing in our communities and so on. And I joined that chorus as well. But I think I'd like to and of course all the different levels of government to have to work together. Mr. Mayor, you recall you and I had a conversation recently. We talked a little bit about the Mayor's Advisory Council on community safety, something we had some time ago. This is an opportunity for you to certainly bring a lot of different entities together, whether or not it's the school boards, labor, other levels of government and so on, and work through a work plan in terms of addressing some of the things that we've talked about here and bringing all of these things together. Oftentimes we react to these situations when they're happening, and when there's a lull, we are comforting in that nothing's happened and there is no necessity for actions to take. Not necessarily that's what we do, but it just isn't, the impression isn't there. I think one of the areas that I think we're really failing in, and we really have to place some emphasis and some focus on, it's the life after one has been incarcerated and have been imprisoned for some time, and you come back out and then there's no opportunity for you. So you have a number of options. One is you can just simply go to social services, which is not sufficient. The other is to continue in the life of crime. And you come out of these institutions without any ability, any trade development, no facilitation of training and so on. I think this is an area that certainly we really need to address, and I realize that there's an element when you have a record in terms of being able to get a job, and we have tried to address this for some time. I don't think we've done a good enough job at that. I think that's something we have to address. If you think about it, if you have been incarcerated and you come back out and you have some access to some family members, and those family members don't have enough resources to actually help you, what would you do for the most part? You go back into the conditions that got you incarcerated in the first place, and there's a tendency that you may get arrested again, but we know that if you are not, you will continue to to elongate and prolong this life of crime and activity, because that's really all the choice you actually have. And so I'm using my time just to speak about that component part of it, which I think is important. I mean, obviously, we've addressed the issue around education, housing, poverty, lack of jobs, and so on. I think those are extremely fundamental to some of the challenges that we're actually having. The other thing is that, I think we have to look at how we sentence people in terms of gun crimes and other activities. I was looking at some stats just last night. There is a country, I won't name the country at the moment, to date, almost 1,000 people have been killed That's not the condition that we're facing here. But the fact that one person gets killed here, that's essentially one too many. And so we have this condition now where it becomes rather sexy to have a gun or to feel that you need a gun because the other persons have guns and so on, because when there's an altercation, it's no longer fisticuffs or any of the things that I guess that used to happen. It is now you draw your gun and other persons are drawing their guns as well, and or you have a gun and the other person doesn't have a gun. And yes, the drug trade and all of those illicit activities are all factors in this. But I think we all have to have a general sense as to this is an acute problem, and I think that we do, but we just have to coordinate how we address these particular issues, and it's important. I think the issue in terms of allowing the associated penalties to fit the crime, we have a tendency here where I think we have a weak system that doesn't really seem to, if you will, alter often the thought and mentality of some of the people who are willing to use weapons in our society, because you bring them in, the police arrest them, and then they're back out again. They're on parole. And we've seen time and time again where some of the bail conditions that are set are not actually kept because we don't have the ability to maintain the supervision and so on. I think that's extremely important. Those are just some of my thoughts on the matter at the moment. And we'll add more as we get this matter to Council, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor Thompson. Councilor Nunziata?
Thank you. I do support the recommendations that we have before us, and just wanted to talk briefly about, in my area, as you know, recently I've had quite a few homicides in 12th Division, and I think that what's happening with some of the guns and gangs in my ward is that we know where the gangs are, we know where the guns are, and it's very difficult. It's very difficult for the police to get rid of these guns because they can't make the arrest that they need to make unless there's a shooting. And what's really important as well, and just recently I had that 16-year-old that was shot in the stairway of one of my buildings, and we had a community meeting, and I had over 200 residents that came out. Most of them were mothers from the buildings, and the mothers that attended the meeting was pleading with us, please help us, please help us. We need more police. We need more police in the area. We don't feel safe. We need support. And so the mothers are asking us to help. And so it's important that we engage the mothers as well, because and as we had them make a deputation at the police services as well, Mr. Mayor, the Somali mothers that came, asking us to help them. And I think that that's one, I think that's part of what we should, be engaging and reaching out to, is helping the mothers to, to cope, and as well as maybe to help us to identify where, if their child has a gun, that maybe we can work together as as a group to help these mothers try to speak to the kids and try to lead them in the right direction. One of the homicides that I had in my ward, it wasn't the one for the 16-year-old, another homicide where there was 3 that were shot. It's my understanding that they were on bail. They were on parole. These individuals, they were arrested. They caught them, but they were all on parole. So you're absolutely correct. The bail system, that is something that's really important that we need to address, because that's what's happening. Most of the gun violence that's happening there, they're repeat offenders, and they're out on parole and they're shooting, and there's no conditions at all, and which is very frustrating. And as far as hiring additional police officers, it's important that we hire the additional police officers because what we're hearing from the community is we want to feel safe and we want to see more police officers on the street. We have, a couple of years ago, there was a hiring freeze, so we have to catch up now to meet the staff complement. So we need to hire additional police officers, and I support that 100%. But at the same time, and Councillor Carroll, you mentioned we have our members' motion going forward. We need to invest into these communities and working with the various youth groups that we have in the community. But I also feel that really concerns me as well is that we do get funding to some of these agencies in the community, and I don't really feel that the funding that we're giving to some of these agencies are really doing what we want them to do with the youth. And there are other agencies that don't receive funding that are doing a lot for the youth and the work, and they don't get funding. And so what I would like to do is reach out to these agencies that are not receiving funding, or I would like to speak to some of these youth one-on-one, get them together and ask them and talk to them. Maybe they'll reach out, and maybe they will have that dialogue with you on really what they want, what they need in their community. I think that's so important. Mayor, do you remember a couple months ago when we met with those youth from the school, and there was those 2 police officers from 12? How they spoke to us freely. I think that is very important too, is to reach out directly to the youth if we're able to get them in some sort of forum and speak to them, because I think that we would be amazed on exactly what they say they need and want, rather than through some of these agencies that we're actually funding and I'm not seeing results. I think we have to look at that. I've always had issues with that. So I will be supporting the recommendation. I can't believe I'm over 5 minutes. Okay, thank you.
Sorry, I've caught myself on my button here. I can't reach my hand up to. There we are. Thank you, Councillor Nocera. Others wishing to speak on this matter? Okay, now I'm going to, if you'll allow me to use a technicality and say that I don't want to make another speech, but I didn't move a motion that just is a technical motion to transmit this to the City Council. And so I was speaking before on item, whatever it was, 8.20, and this is on 8.26, and it's just a motion to transmit this through the recommendation, the letter that I put on going further along with the motion that Councillor Carroll and yourself will have on the order paper. And so if I can just put that as part of a speech that I promised not to make on item EX 8.26. The clerk tells me we need to do this to forward it on to make sure that that report is presented to the council by the staff at the time of the council meeting. May I call the question on that? All those in favor of that? All right, and then going back to 8.2, that's all we have to do on 8.26, correct? And then on 8.20, that matter is before us now, the recommendation to approve the recommendation that came from the Budget Committee as is contained in the report. And I'm ready if you are to call the question on that. All right, all those in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. I believe that completes our business for the day, and we're losing one of our number here to go on to greater things well, not greater things, other things in the clerk's office. So people disappear off into the mist after we've just got used to having them here. But thank you for all your help on the committee, and good luck with your new assignment. We'll see you there, I'm sure, and to be confirmed who the new person is that will sit in your chair. Thank you. Thank you all very much. Meeting is adjourned.